Solomon Northup was a free African American living in the state of New York. He was married, owned land, and was a professional and passionate violin player. In 1841, he met two men who claimed they were circus performers. They invited Solomon to perform with their circus company in New York City, which Solomon agreed to. Once in the city, they convinced Solomon to continue on with them to perform in Washington, D.C. Now, slavery was still legal in D.C., which meant Solomon had to first get a copy of his free papers, which proved that he was in fact a free man. He thought this would be enough to protect him, but unfortunately, once he was in D.C., he was drugged and sold as a slave, then shipped off to the Red River region of Louisiana. In 1852, he met Samuel Bass, a Canadian carpenter who was hired by Edwin Epps, the owner of the plantation where Solomon was working at the time. Solomon confided in Bass and told him his story. Bass then wrote letters to all of Solomon's friends, detailing his location and situation. Letters were passed on until they reached New York officials, who were obligated by law to finally help Solomon. They reached Solomon's location on January 1, 1853, where Epps initially put up a fight. But finally, 3 days later, and 12 years later total, Epps conceded and Solomon regained his freedom. Solomon's memoir, 12 Years a Slave, inspired the Oscar-winning movie by the same name. When someone says New York Stock Exchange, you probably think of the city, and green and red numbers flashing on screens, or maybe even men and women in suits screaming at each other trying to get the best deal at the best price before the bell rings. You probably don't picture a tree now, do you? Well, believe it or not, the New York Stock Exchange started off as a group of stockbrokers who met under a buttonwood tree on Wall Street. They exchanged anything and everything, ranging from gold and other securities to tobacco and even slaves. Originally named New York Stock and Exchange Board, it was later condensed to simply the New York Stock Exchange. To make things more official, the original group of stockbrokers decided to move the party to a more professional environment, so they built the Tontine Coffee House to meet and trade over coffee. But day after day, the space got more and more crammed. The New York Stock Exchange proved it was here to stay, so it moved to its official Wall Street location, where it remains today. Now for this next story, when I stumbled upon it as I was doing some research, I almost couldn't believe it. It is so aggravating, it is so disturbing, and I just hope I'm able to get the story across without getting too upset. So here we go, let's get into it. It's the story of Topsy the Elephant. Captured as a baby, Topsy was an elephant born in Southeast Asia, then sold to the Four-Paw Circus shortly after. When she got older, Topsy was known as being a bad elephant because in 1902, after her drunk trainer, James Blount, threw sand into Topsy's face and burnt her upper lip with a cigar, she in turn threw Blount to the ground and crushed him to death. The papers, of course, went crazy with the news and fabricated all sorts of stories claiming that Topsy had killed up to 12 men before Blount, which there was no evidence to. But anyway, any news is good news, and the Four-Paw Circus was never as popular as it was then. People from all walks of life wanted to come and see this so-called rebellious elephant. While crew was unloading Topsy for a show one day, a spectator grabbed a stick and tickled Topsy behind her ear. The girl was not having it because she grabbed the man by the waist, dangled him up in the air, then slammed him back onto the ground. But before she can have another go, the crew stopped her, sparing the man's life, by selling Topsy to Paul Boynton, who had a zoo-like establishment. Well, after a slow season and a lot of competition, Boynton decided that he no longer wanted to be in the animal exhibit business, so he sold his park to Frederick Thompson and Elmer Dundee, who redeveloped the place into an amusement park. They forced Topsy to move timbers as part of a ride, and at one point her handler, a man named William Alt, stabbed her with a pitchfork because she didn't want to power this stupid ride. Someone told the police, and as a response, you know what Alt did? He let her loose to roam and run free in the streets. Well, anyway, the cops arrested Alt, but released him shortly after. They say Alt developed a drinking problem after this because only 2 months later, he rode Topsy down the streets of Coney Island and marched her into the police station. Poor Topsy had to squeeze her way through the station doors, and I guess it put her in pain because she roared so loud the cops got scared and locked themselves in the prison cells. Alt was finally fired after the incident, but the owners of the amusement park no longer wanted Topsy, as if any of this was her fault. Not only that, but when they came to sell her, no one wanted to buy her. So guess what the owners did? They announced that they were going to put Topsy to death. The press and the public were so intrigued that the park owners decided, hey, we might as well capitalize on this, so they put out another statement detailing the time and date of when Topsy was going to be hanged. Yes, you heard that right. Hanged. Finally, the first sane person in this story, the president of the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, put his foot down and was like, hell to the no. You are not going to put on a show, you are not going to charge people and watch her die, and you are not going to hang her. After a lengthy back and forth, it was agreed that they would kill Topsy by strangling her with ropes tied to a winch, and with poisoning and electricity. And I got mad when I heard all this, but apparently one technique alone doesn't hurt the elephant enough to kill them, which is why they needed to go to this extreme measure. So on January 4th, 1903, the killing occurred with 1,500 sick-minded spectators watching and 100 press photographers documenting. Not only that, but for anyone who couldn't make the event, Edison Film Company made sure to film the execution, titling the film Electrocuting an Elephant. And believe it or not, that film is on the internet today.